Do I belong here? Do I deserve to be here? They all know I'm a fraud. They know I don't know anything. Does this sound familiar to you? Imposter syndrome strikes again. Friends, we know this is hard and affects folks both in and out of camp all the time. Join us today as we discuss strategies for how to identify imposter syndrome, how to cope, and how we can build each other up and prevent it from happening again. If you've been scrolling through Instagram, comparing yourself to others, and feel like you're not enough, stop. You are. You deserve your position and you're fantastic. Now join us for this episode. You need it.
Before we get started with today's show, we've been talking a lot about how we're feeling, our experiences, and what we feel is important. However, we recognize that our lived experiences are not the same as everyone else. We would love to know what you are going through, how you are feeling, and what you want to learn about. You can send your thoughts to beyondcamp@gocamp.pro so we can better serve you.
Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we're here to burst that bubble with you today. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those. We're your host, Rachel Ken. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. Today's topic is imposter syndrome, something most of us, and statistically speaking, uh, the stats, the science backs this up. We've all struggled with this. And I know today, as we hopped on to record this podcast, I said to Cassie, I was like, I've been having a hard time. I've been on Instagram, just like scrolling through other people's profiles. I've been like Googling people's book, what is this person up to? And then being like, oh, I haven't done enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not accomplished enough. And getting really down on myself for no reason. And I think everybody has been in this spot before. And I think sometimes the pandemic makes it even harder because you just happen to have more time to scroll through Instagram or Facebook. Um, Cassie, I'm sure you've felt this before as well from our conversations.
Oh yeah, for sure. So many times. I think for me, like when I really think about it, the biggest times that it is during like job transitions. And like from the application to like the first few weeks of that new job, just like going, oh, you see this job posting and you're like, I think I could do that. And then you're like, oh no, I really, there's no way they'd ever pick me. I just shouldn't bother. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
have like this, and this. And there's a lot of other facts around why women don't apply for jobs. But there's a lot that comes into that self-doubt and being like, well, I'm not good enough. They wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to that new job and you're like, yeah, as you start learning, you're like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Why did they pick me? Am I even good enough for this? And all of these thoughts just keep like rolling through your head.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I really want to pop back to that piece about when it comes up, because I think it comes up differently for different people and sometimes unexpectedly.
Yes,
Before we do that, can you hit us with a definition of what imposter syndrome is so we can all get on the same page moving forward?
for sure. It's a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. I just don't want to ever assume that people know what we're speaking about, because maybe it's a term we're familiar with and other people aren't. And hopefully this way we all have an understanding, a shared understanding, so we can chat about this and it can start some conversation. So you touched on, you have often found imposter syndrome coming up for you when you were transitioning into a new job,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting because I haven't really had that experience. I've had my full-time job for almost 5 years, I guess, 4 or 5 years. And in that, I've transitioned into a new role given the pandemic, but I have
Mhm.
not really had the experience of applying to another job. Um, but I felt it in other ways,
Mhm.
especially when I've like been doing volunteer work and I've applied for new volunteer positions in my provincial camp association or taken on a role. I've very much felt it there.
Yeah, it's like it comes up. I would say like it definitely comes up in other spaces for me as well. But, I've applied in the last year and 1 month for two different jobs
Hmm.
just due to, applying, accepting a position, COVID happens, no job, have to find a new job. Um, so it came up and I think like adding to like as that, especially during that COVID time of like trying to find a job and being like, well, do I even find a job? What should I do? Am I good enough for anything else? How do I move to another industry? What does that look like? Am I good enough for another industry? Will they have me? Or am I
Mm-hmm.
too camp?
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I even struggle with it in this podcast sometimes. Like when we first started
Oh,
this, I was like, who wants to listen to us? Us
yeah,
speak about anything.
totally. Like, who wants to hear my voice for this long?
And then I logged on to a call, and somebody was like, Rachel, we haven't met, but I've listened to your podcast. I was like, oh, it's happening. Which was very neat. It was a neat moment. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes when we are feeling imposter syndrome, we turn to, especially as females, folks often turn to that self-deprecating humor, which you touched on a little bit right there. So I apologize for calling you out a bit, but I think people
It's
really lean
okay.
into that, and I think sometimes that is a detriment. It's like one of those coping strategies, and maybe I'll hit pause on that topic because we are going to come back to coping strategies in a moment.
Mhm.
Um, but before we dive into those, I wanted to share a quote that one of my coworkers actually shared with me. So I was feeling imposter syndrome. I think I maybe had just joined the board or something. Um, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I think I'm the youngest person here. And I'd been asked to do it, which, was a big honor, but I was certainly very nervous and felt very out of place. And she sent me a quote by Michelle Obama, who had done an interview where she had talked extensively about imposter syndrome. And many of her quotes were related specifically for young females of color, which was really valuable. And we can share some links to that in the show notes afterwards. But she said, I've been at probably every table, powerful table that you can think of. I've worked at nonprofits, I've been at foundations, I've worked in corporations, served on corporate boards, I've been at G summits, I've sat at the UN. They are not that smart. And that's not to insult anybody who I sit around a table with because they're all very smart and wickedly intelligent and know what's going on. And I have huge respect for everybody who I've ever sat around a table with. But that was really, that quote really was powerful to me because it was like, hey, Rachel, like, they're not the idols, they're not on the pedestals that you're putting them on. And I think that that's often what comes down to is that we're putting other people on pedestals.
Yes, as soon as you said that, I was like, mind blown. Just like, oh, this is so true. How often do we have this person that we like put on this pedestal and like strive to be like? And when we can't reach that point, we're not good enough.
Yeah, and then we forget that they're human and that they've also learned mistakes. I remember once somebody they started a meeting by telling a story about a time when they were a young camp pro. They were volunteering to do something. They had it all lined up, and it was um, a big situation that carried a lot of weight in the camping community. And so they had all these things lined up, and all the plans fell through at the last minute, and they had to deal with the fallout of that. And I appreciated hearing that story because I was like, oh, if that could happen to you, it'll happen to me probably, I'm sure, at some point, and that's okay. And I felt like that was like a little bit of grace to be like, okay, like we're not, we're all human here. We're not perfect, and that's okay. So
Can you say that one more time? I think we need to hear it one more time just to know that we're not perfect.
we're all human. We're not perfect. We need to stop putting each other on pedestals and stop building a pedestal for ourselves that we are inevitably not going to be able to reach.
Thank you. If you need that, just like sound bite it. Save that for yourself. I think I might do it too.
Perfect. So you touched earlier on some coping skills. So I'm curious as to how you have worked on this, Cassie, either professionally or personally.
I think the biggest thing for me as I was like thinking about this in the last few days is it's been a time. But was it's about choosing my language and how I talk to myself in that self-talk moment. So if like instead of saying, well, that'll never happen, I'm not good enough, it's how can I get better? Where can I improve? What can I shift or change? Or, you know, I am good enough at this. I have this skill and I'm working on this skill. And that's okay.
Self-talk is so important because we become our own greatest critic. Um,
Mhm.
and while criticism and feedback is really important, we've talked about that before. Um, Nobody ever hears just criticism. Like that's not reasonable. And changing that self-talk is a huge game changer. I think for me, I have often tried to put myself in somebody else's shoes to be like, how are they feeling in this moment? Are they going to have doubts as well? Or do they not have any doubts going into this? Why do I need to have doubts? Like, this person is just going to sit at this meeting and share the information they need to know or that they know. And when they don't know something, they're going to sit back and say, I don't know. So why can't I do the same thing? And I found that to be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's even helpful for the people who are learning from us. If we
Hmm.
if we have the value in ourselves to say, I don't know, let me find that answer, or I don't know, let's figure it out together. It's teaching them that it's okay not to know.
Oh, 100%. And I've often said to staff as well, like, you don't have to have the same leadership style as me. And I apologize because I feel like this is going to sound arrogant. Um, but I've said, like, you don't have to be the same leader that I am. I want you to be your own leader. But also, please don't put me on a pedestal. Like, because as directors, our staff typically look up to us.
Mhm.
That is sort of what happens because they're young and they want something to strive for. And that's wonderful. And um, it's a great opportunity and a blessing to be able to be somebody that people look up to. But we need to be aware of how we are presenting ourselves. And so I've said to them, like, don't put me on a pedestal. I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. And sometimes that means that I have to apologize to my staff. But also, like, I'm not perfect. There's going to be parts of me that you don't like and you don't agree with, and that's okay. And I think giving them that permission is really important.
Yeah, I totally like that. Just sounds, I don't think I've done it intentionally, but maybe we need to be better at doing that intentionally with our people and saying, I'm not perfect. Something's going to go wrong. I'm going to make mistakes, but let's see how we can work together.
Hmm. And so when we talk about how to cope with imposter syndrome, I also suggest I did a quick Googling before this and I was like, oh, like what does the internet suggest? And honestly, I would suggest if you are really feeling in a certain situation, hop on Google for a minute and pick out what works for you because we can sit here and give all of our advice, which we are happy to do. But also keep in mind there's like a multitude of things out there. And sometimes you just need to find the thing that will speak to you. You'll read through a list of like 20 ideas and you'll be like, number 17, that's the one for me, and pick that. So I'm always a fan of Googling.
Yeah, we'll Google a few and toss some lists in there right now too in our show notes so that you don't have to go searching too far.
Hmm. Um, I also think personally with imposter syndrome, I often think I'm like, would somebody else be doubting themselves in this situation? If
Uh,
not, like, why not? And is it because they would just be confident in themselves? And I'm like, well, then, Rachel, you deserve to be confident about this. Um, and I think that that's really important is realizing that, especially a lot of females really doubt themselves. We're going to get into some stats in a moment. Um, but recognizing that you deserve the opportunities that you've been given and you've worked hard for them, even if you don't know everything about them.
that is so true. I'm looking at an article right now that says recognize your feelings, separate them from the facts, know what is and what isn't. And I really want to say own it.
Hmm.
Own your feelings, own your facts, and own how good you are. Because you're good. We don't do this because we want to do this. We do this because we care and we want to continue to improve and help other people keep improving.
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is tough. Cassie and I have felt it before. We've certainly sat in it. And I think the other thing I will say is that sometimes when you're feeling imposter syndrome or you're feeling nervous or anxious about something, I think it's a bit cliche, but it's because you care. It's because you want to do the best and you want the best person to be in that role. And I think sometimes it's a scary thought to be like, am I the best person in this? Like people think I'm the best person to direct this camp, to lead this committee, to do this work. And I think sometimes we don't believe in ourselves enough. It's easier to believe in somebody else. And so we need to trust ourselves a little bit as well in going through all of this. So we have lots more to dive into, but we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Wait, did you know that ACA Illinois has been hard at work building a new services portal for the camping community?
What? No, that sounds exciting. What can you access in this new services portal?
Well, they'll be offering a variety of services, including events, resources, and exclusive members only content.
It sounds like it's shaping up to be a one-stop shop for all Camp Pro needs.
That's right. And you don't even have to be a member of ACA Illinois to access these benefits.
Even better, this is pretty exciting and a great new resource for our community. I always appreciate how much the ACA Illinois is doing for everyone in the camping world and not just for members.
It really is. All you have to do is to go to acail.org and sign up to build a free profile. That profile will give you access to all the events and resources, and that will lead you to profile will also lead you to the exclusive content. Remember to visit acail.org today.
So, Cassie, when it comes to imposter syndrome, what are some of the first signs that make you realize that you might be experiencing it?
I'm sitting looking at this question and I'm like, I probably sit in it for a lot longer than I need to sit in it because I don't recognize it soon enough. But a lot of it is like that self-reflection later when I recognize it and that time of like, oh, I was shitting all over myself and I was self-doubting and I was probably isolating myself a little bit more from people than I needed to be trying to like figure out what's going on with me because I feel like this is a newer term that has kind of surfaced over the last few years. I know I kind of first heard about it when I went to the first Women in Camp Summit and somebody spoke on it. And I was like, what's this? It was like something about imposter syndrome and all the woo woo and all this other stuff. And I was like, this sounds interesting. I should go listen. And I was like, oh. And it kind of put everything into perspective of why I felt certain ways at certain times. But like as I think about it now, as I try to shift from like really recognizing it and being like, no, that's not. And I kind of try to address it head on now when I feel like it's something that I'm suppressing in myself.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that the awareness maybe isn't there yet because it isn't something we talk about or we teach um, people about.
Hmm.
And maybe that's something that we need to start adding into staff training. It's like, when are you starting to feel like this and how can we correct that? Because I think there's also a balance between imposter syndrome and humility. I think that it's to come across as like arrogant and overconfident um, can be dangerous when we think that we know everything and we come across that way, it isn't often well received by others. But I think that we can be humble and carry ourselves with humility without leaning into imposter syndrome so much or too much. In terms of when I feel like I'm experiencing it, sometimes it's when I start to lean towards that self deprecating humor that we touched on earlier. And I have tried very hard to stay out of that in recent times. But I think it's easy to joke about that. And I'll never forget one moment we were running a fall camp and somebody, one of my supervisors, asked me to make juice, like out of juice crystals, which is an easy enough task, but I think I had goofed it up earlier in the week and I not used the juice crystals didn't dissolve. The juice wasn't great. So I joked about it and I was like, well, I can't do this, like, or whatever. And she pulled me aside and she was like, Rachel, if you can't mix juice and you talk about not being confident enough to mix juice, how is anybody going to trust you on the ropes course? And you're more than qualified to be on a ropes course. And I was like, oh, good point. So I think self-deprecating how we that humor and how we talk about ourselves outwardly is really important. And sometimes that's a sign of imposter syndrome. Like, okay, I'll get on the defensive and I'll just tell everybody I'm bad at it because I'm feeling like I might be bad at it. And we need to catch ourselves. We need to realize that, like, when we present ourselves that way, people are then going to think that we are bad at it. And that leads us right into that whole fake it till you make it. And Cassie, I feel like we maybe have different views on fake it till you make it.
I don't know. I feel like we've talked about fake it till you make it a few times, like when we just sit and chat on things. Fake it till you make it. Everyone says, you'll be fine. Just fake it till you make it. And I'm like, that's great. But like, what if I don't make it? And I just keep faking it. And how do I know I'm actually progressing? And is that real or is that fake? And I'm like, get all conflicted. I'm like, is this something we should be teaching our people to do, to fake it till you make it?
Yeah, because I think sometimes we teach people that phrase fake it till you make it. And the idea of that is that you pretend to have confidence in something even when you don't.
Hmm.
And then the more that you do that, the more confident you will become. but it can become dangerous, I think, especially with younger or more inexperienced staff who then are faking it on things that they really should have more training on before they delve in. Um, and sometimes that's just like a lack of judgment from just being young and their brain's still developing and they're not, yeah, just a brain that isn't fully developed with great decision making skills. And so we need to be aware of how we pitch that. Like fake it till you make it with leading a campfire song is one thing. Faking it till you make it on the ropes course is a very different thing, and needs to be approached very differently.
Well, and then there's like the people, like when I first took my full-time director job as like a first year director, and the other directors in the area at my first conference were like, "Oh, you'll be fine. Just fake it till you make it. They don't need to know. No one will know. It'll be fine." And I was like, "Okay, sure."
I think it's hard advice because it is can be dismissive of how you're actually feeling. When someone's like, "Oh, just fake it till
Mm,
you make it," it's like, wait, but like how I'm feeling right now is very valid. Like, what has led me to feeling this way? Is it that my whole life I haven't seen myself represented in that role? Because that's really hard. How can you feel that you deserve to be somewhere if you've never seen somebody like yourself in that position? And I say that with a great amount of privilege as a white person who has seen
mhm.
lots of white folks in camping. But as a queer person, I haven't necessarily seen a lot of queer folks in leadership, and so it's easy to have that imposter syndrome of how how do I know that I belong here when I haven't seen myself there before? Um, and I think that that's really important. But I think that the positive side of fake it till you make it is, for example, if you're leading a conference session for the first time or teaching something for the first time, and you know your content, you just haven't presented in that format before, or you haven't actually shared it with people. That little extra boost of confidence there is important because if you get up in front of a group of people and you're like, I really have no idea what's going on. We're just going to like roll with this and see what happens. And you sort of like talk yourself down. People are going to be like, oh, they actually like have no idea what's going on. But if you come in and you're like, all right, like I'm really stoked about this, like this format's slightly different. So if anyone has any concerns with how it's going, like please let me know. And then you roll with it. That's two very different approaches to the same situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see that like there's two different sides, and I'm wondering, because I like to wonder, how can we shift the narrative around fake it till you make it
I
as
think
a societal problem?
Well, because I think sometimes that we use it as a way to give advice without actually giving advice and without
Yeah.
actually like delving in and sitting down with a person and be like, "How can I help you with this? How can I mentor you?" You're just like, "Oh, I'll slap you on the back, fake it till you make it," and like wander away. And the person's left being like, "Well, you're not really that invested in my growth because you
Mhm.
couldn't actually give me something tangible."
Which makes perfect sense. So if you've heard yourself say fake it till you make it and just like smiled, nodded, and like high fived and walked away from a person, please take a moment to not do that in the future. Maybe check in with them and see what they actually need. I know reaching out to ask people to be a mentor is scary as a mentee.
Hmm.
Perhaps our mentors need to help us out a little bit.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's also you can turn to the person and say, "Hey, like, you know, I believe in you. I know, like, I've hired you for this
Mhm.
position. Here's the reasons why I know you can do it. Now get up there, fake it till you make it, because I know you can do it." There's like a little bit of extra oomph behind that. Um,
There's a little bit of appreciation and a person feeling like they're valued.
yeah, and I'm picturing like telling a staff to get up and like lead a campfire for the first time
Yeah.
who's a bit nervous about it. That's often one where people are like, I don't know. And I'm like, I know you can do this. I wouldn't put you in a situation to fail.
Mhm.
So here you go. And I think that's the other thing is like imposter syndrome is tempered when we're leading people by letting them know that it's okay to fail and having a safety net in place so that they can only fall so far if something does go awry.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit around that continued confidence as well. And people feel more confident when they feel like they belong. So when we put that camp setting together, helping people feel like they're part of our community will boost their confidence. They might not need to fake it because they can just make it.
I love that you brought that up. People have to feel like they belong. Let's talk about some stats around imposter syndrome because that will really um, help to highlight where people feel like they do and don't fit in. And that's going to touch on some bigger issues within camping.
Yeah, let's do it. Go for it.
So, statistically speaking, females are more likely to report imposter syndrome than their male counterparts are. And we see that played out in the wage gap, for example. That's a really tangible example of that. And then women of color are more likely to report um, feeling imposter syndrome than white women. And so when you talk about that it's important to feel that you belong, and when we say that representation matters, and if you see it, you can believe it or you can be it, those are all really key phrases when it comes to imposter syndrome. If you have never seen somebody like yourself in a room, then look, why would you feel like you can belong there? And I'm not saying that people don't belong there, but I'm from my own lived experience as a queer person, it's much harder to feel like I belong in a room when I've never seen myself in that room before.
Yeah, that just makes, I'm just going to let you keep going today. You're on a roll.
I didn't even have my pre-podcast coffee. Um,
No.
I know, I'm so new year, new me, something like that, right? I'll make an Instagram post out of it. Um, but I think that we really need to touch on that. And how often does imposter syndrome stop us from applying to jobs? And you talked about that, Cassie,
Yeah.
about there being a lot of research around people not applying to jobs.
Hmm. Women specifically won't apply for a job if they can't check those boxes on that job description of like, yes, I have that certification. Yes, I have 3 to 5 years. Yes, I can collaborate, right? All those check boxes of listed requirements or certifications that you need. A man or a male identifying person will look at it and go, oh, that looks like a good job. Yeah, I got most of those, and they'll apply. A woman will look at it and pick it apart and be like, you know, my chances of getting that are low because I can't check all the boxes.
Hmm. So, folks, we got to believe in ourselves. We got to go for it. And also, we need to believe that other people are going to see things in ourselves. And I think what happens is a lot of the time, imposter syndrome is related to us devaluing ourselves and our worth. And we don't believe that other people could see positive things within us. So then why do we deserve to be there? And
Mhm.
it's like, oh, they just like needed a body to fill this spot, or they wanted to see me fail. But no, like people believe in you and your work and what you stand for, and they've put you in those positions because they want you there. And you need to see that value and worth in yourself. Cassie, what are some ways that you pump yourself up, that you get yourself going when you think you're experiencing imposter syndrome? Could be at camp, could be elsewhere.
Whew. Um, I've learned to speak pretty boldly in the last year.
It's true. I'm very proud of you.
I've done some things that maybe aren't super kosher, but you know, I felt pretty good in that moment of like speaking up for myself and saying something that needed to be said, not because it was necessarily about what we were talking about, but because it helped educate somebody else. Typically, I did it again just yesterday. I was giving a presentation on a topic and about learning and learning styles and all this stuff. And at the end, I got some feedback being like, well, we need to remember that it's all about risk management. And I told him, well, thank you. That is very important, but that wasn't the goal of this presentation. And just went like, you know what, you need to adjust your expectations that were set at the beginning. And just saying that thing, because as soon as this person started talking, I immediately went, did I miss the mark? Did I screw up? And I was like, wait, no, hold up. I can respond to this and I can do it in a way that both honors what they were saying, but also resets that expectation.
Hmm. Sometimes when I think of how I pump myself up for imposter syndrome, I come back to Michelle Obama because I think about the fact that, everybody else has been in this spot that I'm in before, where it's the first time that they've been in a situation or where they're not the most experienced person in the room. But also that a lot of the things we're facing, especially now in the pandemic, people have never faced before. Not everybody
Mhm.
sitting around a table is going to be an expert in everything. Um, because typically you want to have different viewpoints in a room, because that's otherwise you are just creating an echo chamber, and we learn by having different viewpoints, and that's okay. um, and that, like, really shifting that, like, self-talk has been helpful for me, as well as a little bit of extra education. Sometimes if I feel like I'm unsure about a topic, if I can do a quick bit of googling beforehand, that's always very helpful to me.
Yes.
So we touched a little bit on how imposter syndrome shows up at camp. In my mind, it shows up in the staff member who's nervous about leading a campfire. Um, I always found, especially for my international staff that hadn't grown up with camp songs, they were like, "You want me to do what and say what in front of who?" That was always a scary moment for them. Um, but Cassie, how do you think it shows up at camp?
I think a good one that as soon as you said something, it was just like my brain went, that first night with that new counselor and the extreme home loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeking your help and they're like, I have no clue what to do. And they're like, I can't do it. You have to do it. Like, I just can't. I don't know how. I just, I can't. And you sit and you have that quick conversation and you remind them of their tools and you do your best to like give them a little boost back out there to try again because you don't want to hit the director right away because otherwise your staff aren't learning and growing. But I think that's a big spot too, where a lot of our staff are going to be like, "Oh, this is hard. I can't do it. I don't have the skills and the tools."
Yeah, I've often faced it. I'm thinking of two examples. One was my very first night I ever was a camp director with kids at camp. And we had a bedroom at that time. We had like 4 and 5 year olds, or 5 and 6 year olds, I guess, come to camp for a week, which was like fun. I love the little kids; they're lots of fun. It was the first night. It was like 12:30, and there was this bedroom of four young kids, and we just could not get them to sleep. They were crying, and one would cry, the other one would cry. They would bother each other. The flashlights were still out. My supervisor was at camp that night, and I was just thinking to myself, "My goodness, she's gonna think I was should never have become a camp director. Like, what a disaster." Um, but we got through it, and that really helped build up my confidence. And then the other one where I've often felt imposter syndrome is being a camp director and dealing with parents, because I've been under 30 for the duration of my camp experience or directing experience. That people are going to look at me and be like, "So who's the real adult here?" I remember even my father joking once. He was like, "So who's the adult at camp?" And I was like, "That's me. That's me, father. I am. Thank you very much." And he meant it in a very joking way. But I always imagine parents who are want us to talk to the doctor director, and I come sauntering over, and they're like, "This is not an adult." Always hits me hard there.
Yeah, there's another moment too with parents that I always struggle with, and they're like, "Yeah, but do you have children?"
And that's a whole other topic.
It's a whole different ballgame, and then instantly I feel bad because I'm a certain age and I don't have a child, and it just then I'm back in it again, and you have to take that moment to take that deep breath and be like, "Well, I don't, but what I do have is this."
Hmm.
And it's the ample amount of knowledge and learning that we've done over the years.
Absolutely. And I think it can show up in a lot of ways as directors and then also for our staff, as we touched on,
Mm.
and we can role model that. Um, and then I often think to myself as a director, I'm like, well, if I don't do this, get up and lead this song or give this speech or whatever it might be, nobody else is going to do it. So I better do it. Like that's all we got. That's the only option. And that usually helps get me here and get going. In terms of in the off season and in the greater camp community, how does this show up, Cassie? Especially in camp pros who are still finding their feet in the camp world.
Ooh, that's hard. I was going to instantly go for me. Like every time I have to touch a budget, I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Budgets are made up numbers, anyways. And then it becomes a cycle of like, how do I know what number to put there? What do I do here? I don't know. Especially my first year as a director, I was like, I have to what? And you want me to do what? And nobody's taught me to do this. And then you're kind of like basing it off the previous year, but you don't know who that person was that did it. And it's just kind of like, how do I know what I should trust? Who do I trust? Where do I go? And then it just keeps piling. And I think there's a spot like those that first couple of years you do staff interviews too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like how do I know who to choose and who's going to make a good staff member?
And I think if somebody had the magic formula that was guaranteed to work every time, they'd be a multimillionaire. So if you know that formula and you'd like to share with us, give us a ring.
We'd be happy
Um,
to accept.
I think it often shows up in people not wanting to get involved in the greater camp community in their provincial or
Ooh,
state association because I think people are scared. And they're like, well, people have been doing this for 30 or 40 years, potentially longer than they've been alive, or people are from multi-generational camping families. So how do I get into this? Um, and I think using some of
Mhm.
those coping strategies we talked about is really important to try and overcome that imposter syndrome, because I don't want people to not be involved in the camping world because of imposter syndrome and feeling like they don't belong. But that also means that those of us who hold positions of responsibility and of leadership within camping associations, within the camping world, needs to make sure that we're making space for people, for new voices, for different voices, and making sure that people see themselves represented so they feel like they are welcome, and that they don't have to fake it till they make it the whole time. And sharing those stories of things that have gone awry, I think, is sometimes a really great bonding experience, for people, and can be very powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree on that one with the year-round camping community. Like, if you're involved in it, I think there's a space for us to invite people into it.
Hmm.
If you're chairing a committee that needs new people that aren't just the other board members doing another thing, look at your community, invite those people in, because there's something to say about people feeling like they belong because they've been invited to join.
Yeah, it's a really powerful thing to have somebody reach out to you in an email.
Hmm.
And then to also, because that then continues to build the network as well, right? Because then those people can start to ask people, and we can expand from there. So we aren't just getting the same voices. But friends, imposter syndrome is hard. It doesn't go away overnight. It's going to come back. But I think I want to touch back on what Cassie said, that it's important to start to recognize it and name it, before you've been sitting in it for days or weeks, because then you can start to address it.
So, thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us. So you can reach myself, Cassie, at cassie.bloy@stefanricard.ca. Rachel,
Folks are always welcome to send me an email at kentr@girlguides.ca.
please remember to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. We want to send a big thank you to the team at GoCamp Pro for continuing to hold space for these conversations, to ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and support of us, to our producers, Matt and Jotham, for making sure we sound phenomenal every week, and to you, our listeners, for making the time to listen. Your dedication keeps us moving forward. Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.